Genetic engineering has caused a lot of suffering.
Because the scientists overlooked one fact. Superior ability breeds superior ambition.
200 years ago, we tried to improve the species through DNA resequencing. And what did we get for our trouble? The Eugenics Wars.
Hello listeners, welcome back to the show, welcome back to our Mad Science series. We are approaching the end of our series, and as we always do, we're talking Star Trek and looking at how our series theme fits into the world of Star Trek. So we're looking at mad science in Star Trek and who the mad scientists are and what they get up to, what horrible things they do in a utopian, idealized future.
Yes, our penultimate episode of the series on mad science. I can't believe we're here. It's been a long one, this series.
It's been a long road.
I text you. I hadn't seen... So one of the episodes we're going to be discussing in today's podcast, listeners, is Enterprise. It's from the Enterprise series. And I'd forgotten about that cheesy intro music for Enterprise. I text Matt immediately saying, what's going on?
Did you notice? Because I mean... I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I never continued with Enterprise. I think I watched season 1 and then I gave up on it. It's about where I tapped out on the franchise, and then I've just been coming back in dribs and drabs. But they changed. That's a different theme tune. That is a more upbeat remix of the theme tune. If you go on YouTube and check out the season 1 opening, it's much slower, and this one's got like a kind of backbeat to it that really picks it up a bit. I don't know why I don't know why they did.
So I was downstairs watching this. Then my girlfriend heard that music, and she was like, "I thought you were watching Star Trek.
Yeah, this isn't music that James puts on."
Yeah, she was very confused. But yes, we'll get into that when we talk about Enterprise later in today's episode. But Star Trek in general, it's a massive, massive franchise. There's so many different series, different spin-off series, different captains, different lore, all of this massive stuff in the world building around Star Trek. But in terms of the science of Star Trek, it's introduced lots of technology right back from the original series that scientists have gone on to make.
Yeah, very, very unmad science, I guess, is presented it through Star Trek, isn't it? I mean, like, the big example that always jumps to mind is the sliding doors, isn't it? That real life automatic doors are inspired by the sliding doors on Star Trek, so they become mundane and not even technological when you see them on the original series of Star Trek.
But it's all those kind of seeds that they sowed in the original series that was like, okay, here's some futuristic tech, and then people have gone and made it. So stuff like the mobile phones now, like flip phones. When flip phones were really popular, they looked like communicators, which I always find really funny.
Yeah, I never saw a flip phone that was actually designed to look like a Captain Kirk communicator. I feel like that was a missed opportunity. I would have loved that. Like, instead of a V3 Razor phone, what about like a Starfleet communicator?
I feel like they must have had something like that in like walkie-talkies for the kids.
Yeah,
toys
I think I did have a
stuff.
walkie-talkie version of it, but I wouldn't. What about one I can play Snake on as well?
You want all the mod cons.
Yeah.
But even stuff like the medical scanners, the tricorders, there is a company, I think it was in 2011, they won a prize for creating something which was very similar to a tricorder. And yeah, the fact that they are trying to make this kind of stuff. So the tricorders are like the medical scanners, right? So they scan to see if somebody's sick. They can just do like a full body scan.
Yeah, it's like a handheld thing. I think you can do a lot more with a tricorder as well. I think it's sort of all-purpose scientific instrument, depending on what you need.
Yeah, so it's mad that like companies are trying to make stuff like that. And of course, like 3D printing's really big now, and that's very much like the replicator concept. We haven't quite got there that we can make Earl Greys and coffees. The amount of captains drinking coffee in Star Trek was very apparent watching these episodes. Every single captain has to have their coffee in the morning.
Yes,
like we do.
Reminds me of The Expanse as well, with Holden and his coffee on that.
Yeah. So like all of that real life technology. But what is the mad science in Star Trek? I think that's the question we tried to figure out when we looked at these episodes and looked at the run of stuff that we could have incorporated into today's podcast.
Yeah, mad scientists don't really fit the Federation mold, really. You have this utopian society, so there shouldn't really be room for that sort of character. But a bit like the way that, Asimov's robot stories have these rules for robots, robotic laws set in stone. It's like, nothing can possibly go wrong because we have these rules. And then he's written 300 stories where something goes wrong with his set in stone rules. Similarly, in Star Trek, you will get mad scientists popping up kind of on the fringes of what's acceptable within the Federation, or just, not part of the Federation and just kind of doing their own thing out on some rocky outpost away from the prying eyes of civilization.
And it's interesting that each of the different Star Trek iterations have some sort of mad science in there. Like, it's just inevitable. Star Trek covers the length and breadth of science fiction, so it's going to come up again and again. But they all approach it in a slightly different way, I feel like. And there's only a few things that are like recurring. Because if you go back to like the original series, it seems like any sort of mad science or mad scientist they kind of met during that, it was always a scientist trying to remove humanity's flaws. And in a utopian science fiction series where you've got like everybody coming together and doing stuff for the greater good, the idea that there's a scientist who's trying to remove things, that's where a lot of these sort of episodes kind of dive into that kind of thing. That was the kind of interpretation I got from sort of like looking at the series. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's kind of what they were doing in that original one?
I think that you kind of got the whole range of mad scientists. I think anyone can be doing anything, and it can drive a good one episode narrative. So I like those ones that are just. I think the best ones are outside of the Federation and just kind of doing their own thing and having some mad ideas and working on it. I do like it a bit less when it's like revealed that the Federation or Starfleet is kind of up to no good and conducting their own experiments. So I don't think it fits them all, but they do get like some good stories out of that. We watched the Schizoid Man, didn't we, when we were doing some research here? That's a brilliant one where they just pick someone up and he's an absolute prick and he tries to steal Data's body. I thought that was a brilliant character.
Yeah, there was another one in the original series. So Schizoid Man was in Next Generation. There was one in the original series called What a Little Girl's Made Of.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got like a scientist trying to... Basically, it's got androids in and it's all the sort of creator creation kind of stuff happening there. So that was quite an interesting one to look at. But again, all those sort of like original ones were just looking at it from that one perspective. But there were a few episodes in the original series which branch out on that idea of mad science and what the rules are about mad science. Because the Federation, the whole idea of the Federation has been going on for a long, long time. So they've had to make their own rules, like you say, like the Asimov rules over time. And one of the big things that came out during sort of like our look through the franchise was genetics. And we've covered genetics in this series before. We looked at like the boys from Brazil. Genetic modification came up during our Splice and Mimic episode. It's something that it's a key part of mad science. And even just if you look at stuff like Frankenstein, it's kind of, it's dealing with genetic material, but like it's more sort of like the science of putting stuff together and making a body. So it's all kind of linked into this kind of genetic manipulation. And that came out in one of the episodes we've looked at, which we've discussed before, I think, Space Seed from the original series.
Captain's log, stardate 3142.3. Slightly over 2 centuries ago, a group of scientists planned for a race of supermen and created conquistadors.
Name? Khan Noonien Singh.
From 1992 through 1996, absolute ruler of more than a quarter of your world.
Yeah, Space Seed introduces this thing that to me kind of feels like the like a fundamental taboo of Starfleet and Federation society, which is, as you say, talking about genetic engineering. So Space Seed introduces the brilliant Khan Noonien Singh.
So good.
Better known, I think, from being the villain in The Wrath of Khan.
I thought you were going to say better known as Khan!
Yeah. introduces him and along with him introduces this concept of the Eugenics War that then just keeps coming up in every series of Star Trek after that. It's I think the Eugenics War takes place in the 1990s. And then I think subsequent shows might have fudged around with that a little bit as the 90s came and went in the real world. So I'm not quite sure where it sits in the timeline officially now. But originally it was a 1990s war. I think it's like the last really big war on Earth before the Federation is formed. So you've got 2 world wars, there might even be a 3rd world war in the mix, or the Eugenics War might be that 3rd world war. And then humanity kind of like gets its act together a little bit after the Eugenics War. Starfleet is formed, space exploration starts, first contact, etc. But you have this kind of almost original sin of mad science in Star Trek because of how bad the Eugenics War was, that then for humanity and subsequently for the Federation, it becomes incredibly taboo to mess around with genetic engineering, lest we get another Khan Noonien Singh or one of those other tyrants from the Eugenic Wars who are trying to take over the world. So yeah, I think that is the core thing that we want to focus on in today's episode, because it runs through so many, hundreds of years of fictional universe within Star Trek. They keep coming back to this idea of it. So we've got some episodes spread out across the chronology of Star Trek discussing that taboo.
So going back just briefly to the idea of the Eugenics War. So how would you describe that to someone who's never really heard about it in the Star Trek franchise? I mean, big Star Trek fans will know about it, but this was kind of my first introduction into that idea. What's the kind of inciting incident, do you think, that's causing this war?
There's a race of genetic supermen, basically. So the creators of Khan and his brotherhood, I guess, were trying to improve humanity and perfect humanity through genetic engineering. In Khan's specific case and his followers, he is super strong, super intelligent, tactical genius, all of that like DC supervillain stuff, he's got all of those abilities, but he's also got this thirst for power. That's the description that keeps coming up, and a kind of brutal ambition that leads him to basically want to conquer the world. So he becomes a despot, and there's several of them. It's a bit vague, but there's several of them, and they take over different bits of the world. I think Khan basically takes over all of Australasia, that kind of part of the world. And they're all mass murdering tyrants and despots, and eventually the rest of the world is able to overthrow them. Most are killed or imprisoned. Khan escapes on a pre-warp spaceship that has suspended animation. That's how he can wake up in Captain Kirk's time. And then there's other kind of escapees or bits of that era that are kind of also held onto, that we'll get into, that some of the episodes that we're going to talk about get into. But the Eugenics War ends in the 1990s, and peace on Earth again, but at a horrible price, millions, maybe billions dead. And humanity really needs to take a long look at itself in the mirror. And I don't know if they explicitly say this, this led to wanting to become a peaceful species that would go on to found the Federation, but I think that's the kind of implication, is that it's this kind of last great evil that humanity did before becoming a utopian society.
So this idea of the mad science behind that is what led to this utopian. I think that's a really interesting point about Star Trek, that it's come from this it's come out of war. It's come out of this idea of this massive war, where I think the way you're describing it as well makes it sound like they made a bunch of super soldiers, like in Captain America, and they gave them super intelligence as well, and then weren't able to control them in the way that they thought they might? Or am I just reading too much into the marvel of the Star Trek universe?
Yeah, I suppose so. Basically, I don't think that they were intended to be soldiers. I think it was more of that kind of mad science. We're doing it because we can. Rather, I don't think that it was that kind of militarized application like Captain America being given a super serum. I think it was more just like an experiment to better the human race that got out of hand and created uncontrollable Frankenstein's creations, I guess, that then go on a bit of a rampage.
So then it's got more of a kind of Gattaca sense to it, if we're looking at different sort of like sci-fi versions. And this idea of creating a perfect human, which I guess is kind of like the Frankenstein idea, isn't it? It's like it's giving life to something else and then improving things as well. Like even if you go back to like The Fly, he's trying to improve transportation, which goes horribly wrong. But with this, I guess, so with the Eugenics Wars, it didn't go wrong. It just worked really well to the point that you've created these humans that are genetically enhanced, but they also think that they are better, and then they become tyrants as a result. So that's quite an interesting sort of trajectory from that, creating that mad science, trying to do something important, and then seeing your hubris go into a different direction because you were like, oh, I can do this. I'm going to make something better. I'm going to make these perfect humans. And then that sparks an entire war because you've created something you don't know, you can't control.
Yeah, I also think it's really interesting that this is the thing that they choose to make this taboo in Star Trek's storyline, because as you say, there's lots of, hopeful and exciting and interesting scientific ideas in Star Trek, and some of them then go on to become a reality. But I think it ties back to the concept of playing God that we talked about a lot this series, that is where you must draw a line, and you shouldn't mess around with that, basically. And you're gonna get your fingers burned if you do. And that's the kind of decision that's made in the Roddenberry era, and it's respected and continued, although maybe attitudes shift a little bit in the real world 1990s, and we'll talk about kind of further down the line. But yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I think this idea of playing God is too far for Star Trek to accept as a reasonable kind of experimentation.
So how does all that stuff get introduced in that first episode where we see it in the original series? So that's Space Seed, Series 1, Episode 22, I believe. So how is that kind of all set up with the arrival of Khan and his reaction, or his interaction with the rest of the Star Trek crew members?
I find it a bit weird going back and looking at Space Seed, actually, because Khan is quite gentlemanly. There's a lot of, quite a lot of the episode, no one seems to really know who he is, and they're all like, well, he might be this terrifying despot from the 1990s, part of the Eugenics Wars, but we're not sure. And they're like calling in the resident historian to try and the onboard historian who, in the episode, she's just like painting and sculpting and stuff and doesn't seem to do any real work, and is finally called upon to do some history work for Starfleet. But they're not quite sure who he is. I think they can't quite believe that it could be Khan Noonien Singh from the 90s, but they do confirm he is that. But it's all very gentlemanly, lots of sitting around tables, until Khan decides he wants to steal the Enterprise, basically, and return to his rampaging, despotic ways. And Kirk has to have a big stunt double fist fight with him in engineering and kick his ass back to the 1990s, basically.
But there is kind of like a weird sort of admiration from Kirk in that episode.
Yes, it's very strange.
Khan.
Yeah, they have a lot of weird conversations about him. I think it's Kirk and Bones are like very respectful. It's a bit the fascists made the trains run on time, that sort of thing. And they even say like, oh well, he killed fewer people than the other eugenics tyrants. Great. It's like, yeah, it's very strange. And then they Spock's like, what are you talking about? And they're saying, well, like, don't get us wrong, we don't like the man. We're just saying, he was a sort of brilliant man. I think it's just that kind of respect for what a powerful figure he was in history, I guess. That's how they view him. And because he is seen as a figure from history at that point, and they're not really, they're not even sure this is the real guy. So they're sort of talking about this historical figure in the abstract. So maybe that's why they can use that kind of language. And it certainly, and then obviously in Wrath of Khan, the kind of sequel to that episode, that tone is very different, and he's treated like the serious threat that he is. And obviously we've covered that recently on Patreon. So if you want to hear us talking more about Wrath of Khan, you can head on over to Patreon where we covered the whole film. But the return of Khan and the threat he poses is much more taken much more seriously in the movie sequel than it is in the episode Space Seed.
Yeah, and then from that movie, Khan becomes such a important villain in the franchise, and then they do keep going back to this Augments like arc and this recurring ethical problem in Star Trek about what happens when you mess with genetics and try and alter the human genome, basically. It gets brought back up a few different times throughout the various different iterations of the show. But that initial bit of Khan is kind of like, okay, so you do this, you create a bad guy. That's the kind of offset of it. But then they go back to this idea, and in a very surprising way, in what we mentioned earlier, Star Trek Enterprise, in that show, they have an entire arc around the Augments, which is quite an interesting sort of revisiting of this stuff with Khan. And because Khan is so, like I said, established in the Star Trek mythos by this point, and it's just like, it's weird that he became so fundamental after just being like a one-shot character in one episode in the original series, and then they decide to bring him back for the film, and then now they're like, okay, we created this entire thing about the Eugenics Wars and augmentation. So how are we going to go back to that stuff when we've got Enterprise? Because Enterprise is an interesting iteration of it, because it's a prequel series, isn't it?
Whenever a group of people start believing they're better than everyone else, the results are always the same.
I don't need a history lesson from you.
You need it from someone.
Khan was a great leader, but he made one fatal mistake. He ran from his enemies rather than face them. We've spent our entire lives running and hiding. When are we going to make a stand?
This is a great little arc of episodes in season 4, episodes 4, 5, 6, Borderland, Cold Station 12, and the Augments. I really enjoy these because it's tying together two sort of strands of mad science. So the other recurring brilliant mad scientist, we have talked about him in a previous series, is the similarly named Noonien Soong, Dr. Noonien Soong, who is Data's creator in The Next Generation.
Tying it all together.
Yes, who's another brilliant mad scientist character, but a bit less mad. He's a dotty old man, as he's portrayed in Next Generation, and he's eccentric, but he is brilliant and very good, and he creates Data, obviously. But he has his kind of mad science reaching too far and catastrophic results with, Data's brother Law, who's very dangerous and scary. But we talked about him before when we did our AI series. This Augments arc brings in his ancestor, Dr. Arik Soong, also played by Brent Spiner, who plays Data and Noonien Soong, and he's working now on Augments. He's obsessed with the Eugenics Wars and the superhumans that were created, and he's working on that before his descendants are later going to turn to cybernetics and create Data. So I love this, bringing in Brent Spiner, bringing in the Dr. Soong legacy and the mad science of Dr. Soong and Data, and applying it to the Khan Eugenics War backstory and bringing both of those two things together. What did you think of Arik Soong as played by Brent Spiner in these episodes?
Well, first off, I was just really surprised to see him.
Yeah.
Because I think it's an amazing achievement of the writing in Star Trek to sort of merge all of these things together in a very satisfying way. And to have like Arik Soong as this sort of descendant works really well, because if you're a Star Trek fan, you're going to recognize Brent Spiner initially because, it's Data, but it's not Data, it's his descendant, because we're watching a series that is set before the Federation. How is this all going to play out? I think that was really interesting.
And he's a real jerk as well.
Yeah.
Which sort of wrong foots you a bit, because you're obviously expecting Data when you see Brent Spiner on screen. And he's a real bastard.
But that's great because
he's good at it.
He is good at it. And also, like we talked about, we watched the Schizoid Man sort of like as one of the sort of like prep episodes. And in that, you see Brent Spiner deliver a very different performance to the usual Data.
Yeah.
When he is like, his mind is possessed mind is taken over by this other mad scientist. But yeah, so Brent Spiner is definitely capable of doing that, and he's creating a character in this who seems very different from the Data we know in the series. But Soong is clearly brilliant, but he's set up initially as being in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So his genetic engineering has already been outlawed, and you know that he's been doing things he shouldn't have been doing. So he is set up as this kind of like rogue mad scientist already. His walls are decorated with all these theories that he's got and all these things that he could solve.
Yeah.
And he says like, look, this is all going to get burnt because no one's ever going to use this genetic experimentation again. But look, I've solved all these things. I just have to do it because I'm thinking about it all the time, because I am still a brilliant scientist, even though I'm a bit of an arsehole. But then aren't all mad scientists?
Yeah. Yeah, it's that brilliant. It's the ego of the mad scientist, and he's petulant as well, isn't he? Because he's so egotistical, he knows he's brilliant, and he knows that his work could help thousands, millions of people and save lives and all of that. But from his point of view, it's like, oh, well, one little dabble in genetic engineering and all that brilliance goes to waste and I have to spend the rest of my life in prison. But that is how seriously humanity takes this sort of thing. They will lock up one of their best and brightest, and we won't even use his research. We won't even take it. We're going to burn it because he's committed this ultimate scientific taboo of messing around with augments and eugenics and genetic engineering. Although it then gets into the idea that he was working for Starfleet, and it is actually Starfleet who owns the lab that has these genetically engineered embryos. Now he steals them and runs off with them and creates his own little colony of Khans, basically mini Khans. But he was a Starfleet official, and it was Starfleet who was kind of holding on to them. And I guess their point of view would be, well, we didn't allow those embryos to be born. We kept them for research. But it's like, well, you did hang on to them, and you had something up your sleeve. You know, you were doing something there. You know, you were interested in these genetically engineered embryos. So what was the plan at Cold Station 12?
Yeah, and also Cold Station 12, we find out during the arc that it's full of all these incredibly contagious, dangerous diseases as well.
Bioweapons and scary stuff.
It's got all of the worst things that you can imagine, and then these superhuman embryos. But Eric Soong, so he's a brilliant scientist, and he's a bit sort of, he's very cunning in what he's doing. He's always trying to double cross the crew of the Enterprise. And you also see like a different side of him to what you usually get with a mad scientist, because he does seem to genuinely care for this group of augment children that he's looking after.
Yeah.
And he does feel very sort of like paternal to them, doesn't he?
Yeah. He's created this little colony of genetically engineered children. But yeah, like, what are his intentions? I think I'm not actually quite sure, because I think he just seems to think, well, they're better than human, and we should improve the human race, and these embryos are the key to doing it. But then along the way, he's just sort of become a father figure to them. And I don't know, has that sort of stalled his scientific endeavors a little bit? Because he spends quite a lot of time just being like paternal to them. Seemingly, and I'm talking about the kind of 11 years, between his escape and the events of these episodes. Certainly during the episodes, he's a lot more like mission focused. He's like, let's get more embryos, let's expand the colony. But he was just seemed to be happy teaching these kids and raising them. But then what's his end game? Does he want to return to Earth and take over the world with his augments?
Yeah, it feels like he's just trying to sort of push things forward.
Yeah.
He's got that scientific ambition that he wants to prove a point. Like, okay, I am right. This is going to improve things. He says to Captain Archer, like, I could have cured your father from this illness if I'd been allowed to do my work.
Yeah.
So what I am doing is going to benefit mankind, but you don't trust me because of this little war that happened in the 90s.
Yeah. And I don't know, where do you land on that? How sympathetic are you? I think I found it quite difficult because Eric Soong is he acts like a prick.
He does.
And does that kind of undermine the scientific point that he's making?
I think it's that whole scientific guardrails thing that we've come up against like many, many times over this series. And because there aren't the guardrails in place to even try the technology.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's where it becomes murky, because I suppose there's because of all of the horrendous things that happened when it got out of control, they have to keep a close eye on it. But instead of still pulling together this scientific knowledge, they've just decided to completely axe it, because there's that other character. I forget his name because I haven't watched much Enterprise, but the alien character,
Dr. Phlox.
Yeah, so he talks to Captain Archer about it and says like, "Oh well, we managed to do it on our planet, but that's because we looked at it in a different way, and they didn't start a massive eugenics war." And there is something about humanity when they have that kind of scientific knowledge, and if it's not properly regulated, it will get out of hand, and someone's hubris will get the better of them, and then bad things will happen.
Yeah, it's that mirror to Earth, isn't it? That they never went through the same. I don't want to undermine it, but teething troubles of genetic engineering that led to disaster on Earth, and so it's not a taboo for his species as it is for the humans.
But also the idea of genetic engineering probably comes in closer to stuff that happened in World War II in terms of real life history and sort of the idea of eugenics and all of that stuff. I think that's so loaded, and it's absolutely the antithesis of what the Federation is all about, like bringing together all these different people from like different planets, different races, different walks of life. Everyone is brought together by the utopian society of the Federation. Whereas if one person or one group of people are considered the genetic superior, then that's when things get murky.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to avoid with the Federation, with Starfleet before the Federation and Enterprise. Yeah, that's the firewall against that, which is a phrase that's going to come up later that's talked about in Deep Space Nine.
But what did you think about the Augments themselves? Because we're showing them both as children like in the same way that we see Frankenstein's creation. He's like childlike at the beginning. We see these Augments as children, and we see them grown. And the first time we see the Augments, they're being shot at by a bunch of Klingons, and then they do all these karate moves.
Yeah.
And that's how they're set up. And then they're all killing each other, and they're very sort of tribal. What was the sort of like the feeling you got when you saw these Augments? Did they fit into the Khan mold?
Yeah, I was most reminded of Khan and his kind of ragtag band in the Wrath of Khan. They're like a motorcycle gang, aren't they? They've got this sort of like, they're muscly, they've got ripped clothes showing off their muscles, because they've been living in isolation and away from society, I think is the sort of suggestion for why they look that way. But it's based on Khan's maroon Ceti Alpha style from the movie. So they feel like Khan Juniors, which I think actually works quite well, because there is a power vacuum because Arik Soong has left them. They don't have this father figure anymore. They're all quite young. And is it Malik is the name of the one that kind of emerges as the leader, but he has to kill off his rivals. So there's a bit of a power vacuum, power struggle thing going on. So there isn't like that one's the Khan of this group. I thought that made them feel a bit more like equals. And Malik does rise to the top and kills his brother to become their leader, but he is sort of leading by consent. Like, he gets all the other Augments on board behind him with his kind of vision for how things should go. So it's a bit more democratic than Khan's leadership style, I guess. There's no immediate despot. And I guess if this group continued, it would be Malik. But I thought it was interesting that it seemed like he was running things a bit more democratically than Khan would. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because they are discussing things, and he has to get the backing of the rest of the crew members every time. He's not just like the only one in charge. But I think there's a really interesting comparison going on between Malik and Soong as well, because they're kind of the most direct creation sort of part of this sort of series arc. And the way that he is trying to, like, initially you think he's trying to get his father's approval. He considers him to be his father. That's what they call Arik Soong. They're like, he's our father. But as it goes on, you kind of see him trying to overtake him, be the one who's in charge completely. And he uses his own cunning and his own sort of like backstabbing tactics to make this happen. So I found that it was like very intriguing to watch because you never quite know what Malik's going to do. And there's moments when he hugs Sung and you think it's going to be like a father-son moment, but then he's doing like a sly little smile, and you never really trust him because he's still like a scared little child as well, this creation, this augment, because it's the whole sort of nature versus nurture stuff, right? So are the augments that way because of like who they are, or is it because of the way that Sung has raised them to believe that humanity are out to get them, so they need to destroy humanity or have someone else destroy humanity as the sort of the arc goes? So I think all of that kind of is another sort of way of showing this creature creation relationship.
Yeah, the nature nurture thing within them, and how Sung has kind of built them up to be. Has he built them up to become Khan? By telling them that they are special and brilliant, and also humanity is out to get them, and they can never kind of interact with humans, and they'll be locked away in jail. You get that. He's like a runt, isn't he? The one that Archer takes on board the Enterprise, who believes that he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and Archer's like, no, you haven't done anything wrong for existing. We're not going to do that to you. So Sung's kind of been warping their minds a bit, which doesn't seem like a sensible thing to do with young augmented superhumans. A bit of a dangerous gamble from him.
Yeah, it probably didn't help that he disappeared off to go to jail for a long period of time. So he just left these children to their own devices. So they only had that initial knowledge that was imparted to them, and then they just had to carry on with life. And then you see them rebelling, don't you? So they rebel against their creator. It's a tricky one because it feels like it's because of all of the stuff that they have been told by Sung. But can you see it from their side, from their sort of like viewpoint of the world?
I think they've got such a limited viewpoint. I think just because of the way that they've been raised, it's hard to relate to them. I did like the character that gets taken on by Archer and kind of starts to have his eyes open. I thought it was a bit of a shame they just kill him off, to be honest.
Very unceremoniously, don't they?
Yeah. He just sort of gets done in. Is it in the second episode, like end of the second episode by Malik? Because I think you could do an interesting plot line, like come back to that 10 episodes later, like how's he been getting along on Earth and what's life like for him. It'd be even better to do it with an actual augment, because he doesn't have the sort of superhuman abilities, does he? So it's conceivable that he could actually assimilate pretty easily into life on Earth. I think it would have been even more interesting if one of the augments survives. Maybe they do, because I haven't watched further episodes, but see how an augment actually adjusts to life back on Earth. And Deep Space Nine gets into that actually later as well. So we do see a bit of that happening. But you don't get locked up just for existing in Starfleet pre-Federation life. So I think it'd be interesting to see them back on Earth and how they get on.
And just sort of like readjusting to that different way of living would have been an interesting way of doing it. So the Klingons appear quite a lot in this series, and there's a lot of stuff about the sort of Klingon War and all of that kind of hostility. And wasn't there something that the Klingons did also do some sort of genetic engineering on themselves? Because in the original series, you see Klingons, and then they look very different to how they're depicted from the Next Generation onwards.
Yeah, does that happen in Enterprise? There's some sort of bioweapon that causes a genetic mutation, and that's the explanation for how they get the forehead ridges that aren't in something like that. I can't remember. I think that might play out in Enterprise, because Worf makes a joke about it. There's a time travel episode in DS9 where Worf's like, someone asks Worf why the Klingons look like that, and it's like, I do not want to talk about it. He doesn't like, they skirt around it and make a joke out of it. Whereas I think Enterprise actually does have a whole plot line explaining how they got their forehead ridges. There's a lot of that in Enterprise, I think, just like, let's explain a thing from another Star Trek series, which I think plays out brilliant in this trilogy of episodes. They do an awful lot of it in Enterprise, though.
Yeah, because they've also got the Vulcan human relationships and sort of like how that love relationship works, because like a similar human and Vulcan relationship results in Spock's birth, doesn't it, in the original series?
Yeah.
So they're exploring all these different plot lines from the entire Star Trek universe and trying to string them together like some sort of crazy string diagram, like in Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
That's how I imagine it.
Yeah, that's the Enterprise writers' room, I think. That's been every writer's room of Star Trek prequels since like 2004. That's what they've been doing, basically.
Yeah, you need to have an amazing Star Trek knowledge in order to do that kind of writing, I would imagine. At least to do it well. And which is funny because when we talked about the Star Trek movies, one of the things that jumped out is the directors and writers hadn't really watched Star Trek.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, and it was going from the original series. But another Star Trek series, which we're going to talk about, is Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And that takes a different look at augmentation and this kind of genetic engineering, doesn't it?
We left Earth for a Digian Prime. First, I remember being really excited at seeing all the aliens in the hospital. And then they gave me a room and began the treatments. And my entire world began to change.
What were the treatments? Some kind of DNA recoding?
The technical term is accelerated critical neural pathway formation. Over the course of the next 2 months, my genetic structure was manipulated to accelerate the growth of neuronal networks in my cerebral cortex, and a whole new Julian Bashir was born.
So what episode are we looking at?
Yeah, so specifically, we're looking at Dr. Bashir, I presume, season 5, episode 16, and Julian Bashir in general, because this is 5 seasons deep into DS9, quite a big reveal about Julian Bashir, wunderkind, posh, annoying, brilliant doctor who's good at everything and charming and all of that. He's revealed
Too
that
much.
Yeah, the reason he's like that is that he is an illegal augment. He's been genetically engineered to be smarter, better, like Khan, basically. His dad took him to some, backstreet genetic engineer when he was a kid. He wasn't a very smart kid. He was really struggling in school when he was like 6 years old or something. So his dad made this choice to do this to him. And it's revealed in this episode. A brilliant episode I absolutely love Deep Space Nine, but I think this is one of the better episodes. Great performance from Alexander Siddig and the characters playing his parents. The Bashirs, I think they're very good in it. It's very moving. And yeah, this is so we're 200 odd years after Khan, but the legacy of the Eugenics Wars is still so serious that it's still illegal. Total blanket ban, totally illegal. Julian's at risk of getting just drummed out of Starfleet immediately upon finding out, and he's just carried this secret with him his whole life, basically. And he's not the brilliant. Well, he is a brilliant man, but not. It's not natural for him.
Yeah, it's quite a left field thing to do, to kind of rewrite the character in this way. And I know Alexander Siddig resisted this twist initially when he sort of read it in the scripts. Yeah, he felt like it was rewriting the character.
It is a bit, yeah.
And I mean, it is, but it also kind of adds a different kind of depth to him, I feel like, because Bashir, it explains away a lot of Bashir's personality traits in a very different way to what you would imagine, because you think it is all just hubris because he is supremely intelligent and he is, like you say, charismatic, all these kind of things. But having that kind of weight on him that he knows he was augmented and he didn't naturally come to all these sort of great gifts that he has by design. And he really has that. He has a really great conversation with his parents about this and saying like, look, I was only 6 when you decided to do all of this stuff to me, all this genetic engineering, changing my DNA sequence or whatever the hell they're doing. And could you not have left me a bit more time. And then you get the parents' perspective on it as well. Just the idea that they were watching their child grow up and the pain it was giving them, knowing that he wasn't where he should have been academically and even physically. They talk about like he was smaller, slighter, slower, and just being able to give him these benefits to help him in life seemed like the best option for their family. But it raises so many different questions, doesn't it, about why?
Because Julian is a different kind of augment. So the augments from Enterprise and Khan, they're born to it. They're genetically engineered as embryos or before, I'm not sure, but they are born into that life and that's what they live. And, you know, Soong's augments, he raises them to kind of understand that, and he gives them this slightly warped perspective of where they sit, but nonetheless, that's what they're raised to understand. Bashir introduces this idea of like his life is not entirely his own. He wasn't born into this. There was a Julian Bashir, and they do a nice thing with the Jules Julian thing, like the difference between being Jules and being Julian. So Jules, the boy, does he exist anymore? Is that person even alive? And has he been replaced by another person, Julian, who is the genetically engineered man that now exists as a result of that? So that idea that your life is not your own because you're subject to this experiment, this illegal experimentation that's been done on you, and then you kind of just exist as a product of that rather than having your own identity.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that whole idea about personhood, isn't it? And I think the way you put it just then, there was a Jules and now there's a Julian, is a really nice way of putting it, because it reminds me of that. Another one of the episodes we looked at just in prep was an episode called Tuvix, which was a bit sort of more just accidental mad science.
Yeah.
And in that one, you get two characters in Voyager merging into a new being. And there's a big question in that episode about whether they should separate this new being out. So it's these other two like main characters from Voyager, Tuvok and Neelix, or whether they should just leave him as this new being. And are they effectively killing him if they separate him? So in this is bringing up a similar thing, because have they killed Jules, the whole being of Jules, by manipulating his DNA?
Yeah, and I don't think we totally get an answer on that. I think that obviously Julian Bashir is who he is. He's created himself, as every person does as they go into adulthood. I think that's the key thing. But you can understand his resentment to his parents that he didn't have a say in these decisions. But no child has a say in decisions that their parents make for them. That's the nature of growing up, isn't it? But it's quite a drastic one in this case.
You've seen more of Deep Space Nine than me. Do you feel like after this revelation, Dr. Bashir's character changes?
Yeah, they do follow this up a bit, because so obviously he's allowed to keep his job, and the episode ends. I think the episode ends a bit abruptly, and it kind of ends on like an emotional resolution rather than a sort of scientific, sci-fi resolution, which is just like his dad takes the bullet basically and goes to jail, which is right. I mean, it was him who committed the crime, but the episode, I felt it does set it up as if it's going to be, a bigger deal. Like it's unavoidable because he's an augment and that is so taboo. When he's talking to Chief O'Brien, it's like, well, I'm going to lose my job. We all know what happens to augments. And then it's just like, oh, actually, if my dad sort of takes the blame for it, we can just carry on as normal. And it's all back to normal for the start of the next episode. But because he's still in his job, they have a sort of plot line. I can't remember. It might just be one episode or it might run for a few episodes. But other augments who exist within the Federation come to him for like help. I think they're not getting on as well. They're not like successful. That I think they maybe live in like care homes or something like that. Like the augmentation didn't work so well for them. They're sort of maladjusted, like savants. Like they can't function in society, but they have brilliant capabilities. So that he kind of brings them all together to try and help them focus those abilities and contribute to society better. So he becomes this kind of a bit more of a public figure to help other augments who've had this done to them and it hasn't gone well for them. So it's slightly moving the needle on the taboo of it. It's still an illegal practice, but there are people who are more like victims of it, I guess, that he's then trying to help them contribute to society and become functioning members of the Federation. So it's a little bit more of a hopeful spin on it, I suppose. But still, never really moving away from the fundamental taboo that it shouldn't have been done to any of these people in the first place, and it remains illegal to do it.
So they keep that. They use that idea you mentioned earlier about the firewall, don't they? The Admiral says this is a firewall against having another Khan created, because he says I think he says directly in the episode, for every Julian Bashir we could get a Khan. Yeah. So it's having that regulation around it.
Yeah, for every Julian Bashir, there's a Khan Noonien Singh waiting in the wings. And yeah, I am the firewall against that. Starfleet, the Federation, we are the firewall. So I must maintain that. I thought that was a great speech. I mean, I didn't love the ending that the dad just sort of takes the bullet, but that was like an incredibly written, naval judge administering justice kind of speech. That character's in it for 3 minutes at the end of the episode, but it's just an incredible performance from that guy. That kind of hologram contact they're having with him. And then we haven't even talked about Dr. Zimmerman, who's the kind of inciting incident to this. So again, it's kind of tying together different threads of Trek mad scientists. Zimmerman he's like a holographic engineer genius. Yeah. And he's played by Robert Picardo. He's the guy who designed the emergency medical hologram. That's how all of this plotline comes about in this DS9 episode. He's making a longer term version of the Doctor from Voyager, and he needs a model template Doctor that he wants to base this hologram on. And because Bashir is so brilliant, he's come to copy his brain basically to create this new long-term medical hologram, and he's interviewing all friends and family to get a full psychological picture, and that's how his past comes out through his parents. But he's another kind of he's not quite a mad scientist figure. He's quite professional. He seems to be very good at his job, but he's a great arrogant, egotistical scientist for sure.
He's got that real ego problem, hasn't he? The fact that he's given the emergency medical program his likeness.
Yes.
All of that's brilliant. And just the way he operates throughout that. There's the kind of B storyline about the woman who works at the casino.
Lita,
Lita, and that love interest thing that's going on. And Zimmerman comes in, swoops in and tries to steal her away. And just the way he operates in that, he's very kind of smarmy.
He is a smarmy, yeah. Smarmy and brilliant, which is funny because that's kind of how Bashir is in the earliest seasons of Deep Space Nine. He is smarmy and very slimy towards Dax, and obviously he's much softened by this, but it's 5 seasons in, and he's a very likable character by this point. But yeah, that there's a nice mirroring between those two characters. You can play it for just fun with Dr. Zimmerman because it's Robert Picardo. He's great fun. He's only going to be in it for an episode. We can have jokes at that character's expense and it doesn't matter too much, but it's an interesting mirror to Bashir's attitudes earlier on.
Yeah, I like how they've done all of that. And I think also the difference is, so when you've got someone with that supreme intellect, the kind of arrogance that comes with, and that's a core part of a mad scientist archetype, isn't it? Because their intellect overtakes and they can become a bit of a bastard. But in this, it's really interesting the way that the other crew members, especially O'Brien, are talking about Bashir. And O'Brien says he's nice, he's genuine. I can't remember all the words he uses, but he says some really nice words. And he's like, but don't tell him that. Yeah. Don't tell Julian. And then the other thing I found really interesting, because you talked about sort of how Bashir gets the other augments later on, and that's kind of the way they go down this route of the big reveal about his augmentation past. I thought maybe it would be more that he's been trying to hide his abilities more, because obviously he's highly intelligent, and he's also got this great hand-eye coordination that they demonstrate with the darts game at the end of the episode, where he just goes, "Oh, I've been letting you win all this time, O'Brien," and just gets a bunch of bullseyes. I thought maybe it would be the fact he didn't have to hide it anymore, and then what that would result in. Would that change his character?
I don't think they do a lot of that. I think there will be some jokes at Julian's expense from O'Brien and Dax maybe they can sort of poke fun at him a little bit, like, oh, well, you're only saying that because you're an audience, stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
I think they do that a bit more, but I don't think they make much out of, was he holding back on his abilities? I don't think he has been. I think, you know, he's a brilliant doctor, that's his life's work, and he's followed that through, but it's been allowed to happen because of his augmentation. So I think he's still just at the top of his game medically, but now we know that what the background of is in. And I can kind of see why Alexander Siddig maybe wouldn't have liked that. Because the thing is, like, he was so arrogant and smarmy in the first season, but the writing on DS9 is amazing. And 5 seasons in, you like him. If you know, the friendship with Miles softens him. They're a brilliant duo. There's so many different, like, good pairs. It doesn't happen with Dax. She knocks him down a peg or two, but then they have a very good kind of like rapport from then on. So I can see how he might have felt like, oh, you know, we've done all of this like great acting and writing to make this character lovable, and now we're going to sort of undermine that a bit by saying he was actually an augment. But I guess from a kind of wider like Star Trek mythos view of it, you know, you just got to suck it up as an actor, because it's kind of it's interesting. It plays into all the Eugenics Wars stuff, you know, and that's really enjoyable for the audience.
And again, I think it speaks to the strengths of Star Trek in the way that everything can connect in the universe, but also you can flip stuff and you can show it in a slightly different light while still keeping that sort of core message of utopia and where we could get to. I think it's really well done throughout all these episodes which we picked out to look at in today's podcast. I wasn't quite expecting us to go down this route when we started looking at mad science in Star Trek. I thought it would be just the generic kind of monster of the week, mad scientist of the week. Here are a few mad scientists. But again, Star Trek continues to surprise me in all of the different ways that it approaches different subgenres of science fiction and how it expands on them and gives us something new.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's surprised you a bit. And yeah, I like that there's this one kind of thread of mad science that they do seem to keep picking back up as you go through the different series of Star Trek. But there's no shortage of those Monster of the Week mad scientists as well, and there's lots of fun episodes with them. Like you mentioned, the Schizoid Man, that's a brilliant one. Bob Kelso from Scrubs shows up in a... He's doing like an experiment on 2 binary stars. That's an episode of Next Generation. And he's not really a mad scientist, but he is just very egotistical and rude and annoying throughout the episode. So he's like, you know, they get loads of characters like that. We've talked about like the Genesis Project as well. That's a good example of it in the movies in Star Trek 2 and 3. That's a kind of recurring mad science element. But yeah, the big one is the genetic engineering, this cultural taboo lasting over 200 years of fictional plot. I think that's a really interesting one, and yeah, I hope they come back to it more in future series.
And listeners, if you've got any other episodes which you think really capture the mad science subgenre, just comment underneath the episode and let us know what they are, because always looking for more episodes of Star Trek to watch, and I think it's really interesting just looking at the different ways it tackles the different subgenres.
Well, I think that about wraps us up in our Star Trek Mad Science conversation, doesn't it? If you've enjoyed this, do subscribe to hear more, although there won't be very much more Mad Science to subscribe to as we're reaching the end of our series.
Yes, we'll need to be doing the big reveal of our next series before long. But before that, we have another episode to round things off. But remember, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us all over social media. We've got a website, journeythroughsci-fi.com. Or you can find us on whatever social media you use, at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod.
If you want to support the show, a free and easy way for you to do that is to leave us a review. Leave us a 5-star review with a comment about why you like the show. It's quick, it's easy, and it really does help us and helps new listeners find us.
And we talked a lot about Star Trek in today's episode, but we also have a Star Trek mini-series going on Patreon at the moment. So if you want more episodes on Star Trek, go over there. We're covering the cinematic universe of Star Trek, right from the first Star Trek motion picture. And we're going to go through charting how they develop and change throughout the years.
Yes, that's over on Patreon. But here on the main feed, our next episode will be our conclusion. We've got one more episode of Mad Science. We're wrapping up the series, and then that's the end.
Yes, we're going to be looking back at all the different films we covered on our Mad Science series, a bit of a retrospective episode, and we're going to be dishing out some awards, some made-up awards that we've got for the different Mad Science films that we've covered.
That's all for now. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon.
Bye!